Pam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Can you give the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Okay, I'm Pam Dixon. I'm the founder and executive director of the World Privacy Forum. I am in the US, one of the early people who began working on privacy in the early 1990s. So this makes me ancient by privacy standards. A lot of people who are getting into privacy now only have about, 5 to 10 years. So it's been a while. It's been a minute. I wrote a book. I got into privacy because I was at Johns Hopkins University on a fellowship, and I sat down and I was working with a group of students, and we were discussing the internet, and I realized I had this coup de foudre. I had this strike of lightning, which was, oh my heavens, I bet I can help these students with the internet. So I was very early on the internet and really started using the internet to help my students. And what I realized is that the as you got on the internet, there were implications that were different in the digital world than in the analog world. And as I started thinking about this, I thought, I wonder how this changes job search because at JHU, one of the questions was, what are the professions that are going to be up and coming? And I thought, well, I wonder how how the baby internet will change things. So this led me to start really contemplating, okay, what does the future of the world look like when it's a digitalized society? And so it really became an obsession, and I really started doing the early research on that. And I came to an early conclusion, which was that it was going to change the world in fundamental ways, but ways that were probably unpredictable.
Yeah.
But I felt it likely that the level of autonomy that I grew up with, because I was primarily growing up in an analog world, that level of autonomy could not be possible in a fully digitalized world unless laws and norms and protocols were moved over from the analog world into the digital world. So this was my initial premise for getting into privacy. So I wrote a book in 1993 called Be Your Own Headhunter Online. I co-authored it with someone named Sylvia Tierston, and the book was sold to Random House Times Books, and it was at that time that was a really big deal.
Yeah.
So um, for that book, it's the one of the very first books that ever talked about the World Wide Web and privacy. In fact, it probably was the first one. It was put up for a Computer Press Award and all sorts of really great, geeky, fun things. And in the process of researching that book, I interviewed someone named Beth Gibbons, who ran one of the first privacy organizations in the United States called the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse in San Diego, which is where I lived at the time. So I interviewed her, and she had some really great stuff to say about workplace privacy, and it just enchanted me. And I'm like, this is amazing. So later on, in my own time, not part of any scholarly work I was doing, I decided to write about risks of privacy in job searching mechanisms and ecosystems. So what I found was a problem were resume databases. So I wrote a really early report on this, and it ended up being 50 pages, and a there were a number of they were called job boards at that
Yeah.
time. Now we would call them a job search site or something like that. But anyhow, or a career site, who knows what they're called now. But at the time, I found that there were a number of them that had very significant privacy and security issues. I mean, we're talking selling resume databases off
Yeah.
the back end to headhunters and whatnot. And this, of course, there were no laws at this time in the US. There's nothing to prevent this. And it was, it was the Wild West. It was the
Yeah.
rootin' tootin' Wild West. So I wrote this report, which by my standards today was just really very clunky and early. But I shopped it around to like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and a couple of the existing
Yeah.
ones. And one of the people who was working at that time was Richard M. Smith, who was he was the first internet security geek guru person, really set the kind of the model for that. And he goes, He went to the University of Denver School of Law's Privacy Foundation, said we need to hire this person. He was the lead director there. So they hired me on as a principal investigator, and thus began my technical training on packet sniffing and whatnot, and coding, etc., with Richard Smith. So I did that until the really late 90s. And then what happened is that after 9/11, I felt that the world was going to change and that all the trends that we were seeing and had documented in the technical world would just accelerate with the passage of Patriot 1 and
Yeah.
2. And, most people who didn't live through the era I did won't understand the depth to which the United States changed between before the Patriot 1 and 2 and after Patriot 1 and 2. It really changed privacy. So I decided that, the very best thing that I could do would be to move away from strictly technical research to go into really broad-based research. And there was no organization in the world that was doing that. No one, literally no one, even academic institutions weren't doing it. So that's why I founded World Privacy Forum. So our mission and purpose is to do private research, privacy research, and data governance research in the public interest as a nonprofit organization. So that's what we've done ever since 2002. And we have a couple of core areas that we work on. We tend to work on complex ecosystems work. Any work on data brokers, identity ecosystems, healthcare ecosystems, financial ecosystems, and just in general, how privacy works globally and the way these interact together. And among the early reports we were working on were the intersection, this is in like 2007, the intersection between AI and genetic databases and machine learning. So we wrote, I believe, the very first machine learning and AI predictive algorithm and privacy report to exist on the planet, to my knowledge.
Wow.
And we intersected that with how that works with data brokers and data laws and whatnot. And now this was all focused on the US. And then, we just grew from there. And over time, because I became, an in-depth expert, I ended up working with a lot of multilaterals. So for many years, for 20 years now, I've been a delegate at the OECD in Paris, France. And over time, as I learned more and as I got more experience, this was I kind of promoted. You don't get promoted at OECD, but I'm now chairing the civil society work at OECD in the field of AI. So that was a real, it's been a really great perch. I also now have a position at the World Health Organization. I am an advisor to their Health Data Committee, or there's a thing called the Health Data Collaborative, and they have a board, and I'm an advisor to their board on data governance, and I also work directly in their data governance working group. And then I also work with the UN in their National Statistical Division and work on global governance of national statistical organizations and what are proper privacy and data governance controls, because everything is changing.
Yeah.
All of these ecosystems that I've mentioned are just changing so much. So we've done a lot of work. We have a patient's, for the US audience, we have something called a patient's guide to HIPAA. We literally just finished an update a couple days ago. Massive, massive update that took a very long time. So we'll be getting that published in the next couple of weeks. We have a global study on all the data governance laws in the entire world.
Wow.
It's the only one that exists that's done to what's called the ISO UN M49 standard. I know that's very geeky, but it includes every country. Most of the research you see on this, it does not include every country. So
Yeah.
we include the gaps and the things that are there and the things that aren't there. But anyhow, we have a lot of work on AI that's come out. We did a huge report in 2023 on AI governance tools. And I'm working on quite a few pieces right now on health privacy and AI, on something called collective privacy, which I've now taken all over the world to get global feedback on. and I workshopped it in the US at the Privacy Law Scholars Conference in 2024. So there's a lot of good stuff coming. It's a very, very good time to be involved in privacy.
So a lot of stuff there. So, what has been, with the launch of the internet was probably the beginning of a major shift in privacy.
Yep.
What was kind of the framework and the perspective on privacy before the internet launched in the US?
So if you look at the internet, let's put that down to like late 80s.
Yeah,
That's when I got on it. And I think that's when most, non-government people, you would have to be in academia or a student, but that's, I think, when most people who were early adopters got on it, that or, maybe up to like 91, 92,
yeah.
93. That was the phase. And that's when I first got on. Before that, really what you're looking at is a host of laws that came into being primarily in the US in the age of the very, very first, modern age of privacy, which was in the 1970s. So the very first privacy law in the world was passed in Hesse, Germany. It's like less than a page long. But in the United States in the 1970s, the US passed something called the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or the
Yeah.
FCRA. It is a, it is considered to be the first major piece of privacy legislation in the world. It's quite good.
Mhm.
And it's based on fair information practices, FIPS. And the fair information practices were actually developed in the United States in a Health, Education, and Welfare Committee, HEW, before the agencies changed and it
Yeah.
became HHS and education agencies. So anyhow, that early HEW report, who had absolutely famous members, including Willis Ware. I mean, the fair information practices, they were taken, kind of enumerated in the HEW report in the US. The OECD in Paris noticed them and they're like, you know what? We like these. So they took them and they put them through a multilateral, multi-governmental process. And those became the OECD privacy guidelines. The OECD privacy guidelines are based completely on the FIPS with additional, obviously, narrative, et cetera. They're very important. And because it was agreed upon by and ratified by the majority of governments in the developed world at that time, then these percolated into the laws. So at the time that a very, very famous computer guy, Willis Ware, was still alive, who worked so much on the FIPS, the they became the OECD privacy guidelines, and Willis Ware lived to see them become the rock of Gibraltar of EU 9546. So it was a mid 1990s privacy law in Europe called the Data Privacy Directive.
Mhm.
The Data Privacy Directive was the first multinational privacy law that ever passed. And from there, you just saw a profusion of privacy laws in the US, in health, in like HIPAA was 1996. You have all sorts of other privacy laws, GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, and so on and so forth. You saw all this from the 70s all the way through to the 90s. You really saw a lot of these laws passing. And then, of course, later on, when you get into the 2000s, you get into the beginnings of state privacy law
Mhm.
a little bit, especially in the health area, especially in the financial sector. But the big event, of course, was right around 2012-ish, 2013-ish, when folks in Europe were like, the EU 9546 isn't really matching where the internet has gone
Yeah.
and where digitalization is taking us. We need something updated. So that thus began the conversation around what we know as GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. So the GDPR, one of the great masterminds behind GDPR was an Italian, the European Data Protection Supervisor named Giovanni Buttarelli. He was a brilliant and charismatic man. And he was the EDPS, the Data Protection Supervisor of all of Europe. And he shepherded GDPR until he saw it through to 2018 till it was enforced. And GDPR, he conceived of it as having extraterritorial provision,
Yeah.
which meant that the law was based in Europe, but it applied to any company anywhere doing business with Europe. And this created what I consider to be the most significant change in privacy law in the world, which was it incentivized all the other countries of the world, for the most part, to pass equivalent legislation. And
Yeah.
that's pretty much what's happened. So I spent personally 4 years creating the research of what this looks like in the world. So now we're at like 165 plus countries, most major countries in the world, and even now getting to the very small countries are passing either GDPR or GDPR clones
Hmm.
and doing that implementation. And one of the only countries that hasn't done this is the United
Yeah.
States, as well as the small island nations like Tuvalu and, folks that do not have the economic infrastructure to pass such a law. And so, but this has created a paradigm where you've got a system and an ecology of privacy ideas that are updated and grew originally from FIPS, but then were expanded and changed and altered with the technology. And now we're sitting at what I call kind of the flower of digitalization. So, I'm kind of winding around your question a little bit, but if you look at the internet and where it started in the late 80s, early 90s, it was the beginning of what I would now call digitalization. Digitalization, I always thought it would take about 20 years. It did. And
Hmm.
in fact, I would say it took about 25 years. But now, and you'll remember like the big data era. That was like when I saw the big data term flying around, I thought, okay, now we're getting into critical mass
Yeah.
of data. And this is just the outgrowth of the internet and better connectivity and, better digitalization of, native databases, et cetera. But all of this was like, if you were going to look at a trajectory, this was all trajectory leading up to where we are right now.
Yeah.
Where we are right now is actually the internet era has flowered and bloomed. That bloom has done its purpose. It has fallen away, and now the actual um, the actual tree sprouting from that is growing, and that really is the blending of machine learning and artificial intelligence and digitalization, and that's really where we are right now. And uh, there's so much confusion around how AI impacts everything, and everyone's talking about LLMs. But the factual basis is that the majority of what's happening is huge advances in machine learning, which have created some very deep machine learning, which have caused extraordinary systemic change
Yeah.
across the world, even in parts of the world where you wouldn't think that this is happening. But the impacts are far and wide, and we are right now we are in the transition that happens once every 1,000 years. We're very lucky people.
So what were the kind of the consumer perspective changes of this initial digitalization of everything, and then let's talk about this next step with AI, and like what's the next step look like?
So the initial consumer perception of all of this stuff was that this is great, right? The internet's great, fabulous. I remember in the very early days of Google when they started Gmail,
Hmm.
I looked at this and I'm like, what? They're allowing their advertising engine to scrape mail for keywords? No, this is not okay. And I wrote this fairly passionate letter, basically saying, look, this sets a really negative precedent. And we got 30, Beth Givens and I worked on this and we published it and got a lot of sign-ons internationally. And I got death threats for like 2 years over that letter. But you know what? We were right.
Yeah.
And Google eventually, I got a call like a decade later. It was a long time after that. And Google was dropping their ad scanning because it did not pass muster in Europe and it created huge legal problems for them. They stopped it. And, I consider that a win.
Yeah.
That's the right thing. But that one little teeny episode just shows you consumer opinion went from yay to I don't know.
Ick.
I don't know. Not sure. And the exact same thing, the same thing you saw with social media. It's like, wow, let's post everything on Facebook or MySpace or, all these other little places. And then, of course, there's been a lot of migration to all the other social media that's grown up since those early days. And, now I think there's a lot of knowledge about social media. Parents used to post their kids' pictures
Yeah.
willy-nilly, and now you have, children suing their parents for doing so. And so you really see this continuum of, and it's pretty predictable in depending on where you live.
Mhm.
That's a caveat, by the way. Um, but in the US, you really see this. It goes from yay, 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 this is great innovation to, oh, what did we do? We need some guardrails.
Yeah.
But in other parts of the world, so in Asia, it's very, very different mindset. It's so profoundly different. It's almost difficult to describe. They are more flexible in their ideas about privacy. They're not as locked down, but at the same time, they're much more cautious about putting up guardrails. But the guardrails themselves are more flexible, so that makes a really big difference. So, um, in Africa, you see that depending on what region of Africa you're talking about, Francophone, Anglophone, etc., you'll have a different approach. India, you'll have a completely different approach there. It's the most digitalized society on the face of the earth. They have an Aadhaar system, so they're fully digital and biometric, and they have real-time systems even to the smallest, poorest villages. So they have very different ways of doing privacy, and they have a Supreme Court opinion that really helped them. So there's so much tokenization and de-identification in India. They have amazing technical privacy protections. You look at Europe, and you see a lot of legal protections, but there are emerging gaps because of the way technology is changing.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on where you live and what your mindset is, kind of what the conclusion is. But I think that right now, what we're really seeing is we're seeing a very significant adaptation to artificial intelligence. There was a study that came out. I don't know if all of it is public yet, but it was presented to an OECD meeting in June of this year. Was it June? Yes, it was June. It was about mid-June, and it was a study from the University of Melbourne, and they did trust in, all of this stuff that we're talking about. What is the trust index? And then what's the use index? So the highest use of super advanced digital technologies is in the wealthiest countries, as you might imagine, including especially the US. But the highest trust of these systems is in the developing world. So developing Asia as well as developing Africa and other regions. So what you see is actually a really interesting situation where some of the developing nations are earliest adopters of some of the new AI technologies
Mhm.
or systems, and some of the developed nations are going, we're not sure about this yet. Maybe we should wait a bit. So there is a very real potential for what a lot of experts are calling a leapfrogging effect to happen within the next decade. But I think it's very early days right now, even though AI and machine learning have been with us for many decades. I mean, remarkably many decades, but particularly we can point to the 1950s when the brothers Fair and Isaac came
Yeah.
up with their credit score, right? So yeah, I think it depends on where you live, depends on your point of view, but in general, I'd say that most people go from trust to mistrust and wanting guardrails. Right now, though, the ecosystems that we're living with are so complex. It's kind of like in the early days of computing
Yeah.
when it was DOS. For me, I could program DOS pretty easily, but when it went to 64-bit on Microsoft systems, I'm like, oh, this is too much for me. And then now, obviously, it's really hard to look under the hood of an Apple computer or,
Yeah.
an iOS system. So it's kind of like that. Our systems are very complex, and there's a lot to be said there, and it's you know, in the US, one of the themes that you see in privacy is control and consent. Let's
Hmm.
control this data flow. Let's provide the opportunity to consent. But we're moving into a time when consent is changing radically, and the opportunity to have genuine insight into every single piece of data flow
Yeah.
about you is becoming more and more difficult. So there's a very, very significant movement called DFFT, data free flow with trust. Data free flow with trust is something that's being worked at on a global level amongst a lot of the governments to figure out, okay, how do we manage this situation and can it be managed? There's a lot of controversy around data free flow with trust. People who are on the privacy side look at it and go, not sure about this. We think we need more guardrails. People on the innovation side, they're like, this is good because there's fewer roadblocks.
Yeah.
But I think actually we are in such a complex situation. It's almost impossible to characterize everything under one rubric anymore. It's the geographic differences are quite significant now, and regions are making their own pathway. And I'd say the game changer actually in privacy is more than anything else the impact of advanced machine learning.
Yeah.
And the thing is that in a report, Bob Gelman and I, Bob has worked with the World Privacy Forum for many years. We wrote a section of that report. It's right at the beginning, and we discuss what I call modern privacy. And we described pretty much what I talked about here, which is, kind of the lead up to our modern day. And, we are, in many very meaningful respects, we are at the end of what we knew as a lot of the privacy principles.
Yeah.
They have flowered. And there are new principles awaiting, but we don't know what they are. Now, I think there are people who would tell you that they know what they are. I think I see hints of what they may be, but I actually think we need to be very careful right now because we need to look at the ecosystems and see what's happening before we just make these assumptions and we're like, oh, well, let's just assume that we need this or that. I'm not sure of everything we need. I am sure of some of the new problems, and it's one of the things I've been working very hard on. Um, this is the collective privacy problem I was talking about. This is something that's been lurking in the wings for about 20 years, but now we really have a situation. Um, but there are many other aspects of privacy that change, that morph. Some get better, some get worse. It's not a all or one
Yeah.
situation. It's a very complex ecosystem at this point. I hope that gets at some of the question you had.
I think that kind of helps. Like, it is not a black or white. It is not a linear
It is
progression.
nonlinear. It
It's
is
an incredibly
nonlinear.
complex system.
Yep.
And I'm sure that's what makes it hard to, and we don't know where it's, it's one thing of like, gasoline powered engines. Okay. We, they've been around for, 80 years or whatever it is. And we see, there's refining. We can make it more efficient, lighter, smaller, faster, better, power ratios. We can tweak this for vehicles that need to tow. We can tweak the engines. And so it's tweaking a known system. I think
Right.
with privacy, it's we don't know where it's going. We don't know how all these systems, what it's going to look like in the future. And so we don't know what is it kind of like we're in a stage of we don't know what to do.
So that's a really great analogy. I really like your analogy a lot. I think it's great. I think from the 1970s till about 3 years ago, I'm not going to put it quite at 2017, but let's put it at 2022. Um, I think we were working with a known system and we were tweaking it.
Mm-hmm.
And um, you know, look, the advent of Chat GPT did not change the world of machine learning, not as I knew it. 2017 did with a paper that really talked about transformers and really articulated a different way, more efficient way of doing AI, which led to, of course, advances in large language models, et cetera. But that is not everything. But it finally did. ChatGPT in its inception, in its first burst, really did capture the imagination of people because basically they they sucked in and ingested the internet, and no one had ever done that before. And it was audacious in its scope and in its the amount of money and chips,
Yeah.
sheer compute that it took. I mean, it was audacious and bold, but it does not mean that when we're thinking of privacy, that that's the only thing we should be thinking of anymore. Um, and that's right now, that's kind of the overreaction
Yeah.
that everyone, literally, pretty much most lawmakers are having. So I think this will come back pretty quickly. There's already a lot of signs that it's coming back off of that hype cycle. Look, it's important, but it's a piece. Um, I think I think that we do have hints of where the problems are because we have a lot of information about machine learning and about neural networks and how they're operating, and we know where some of the problems are. We do. Um, I mean, one of the big problems comes as you get to more advanced science. So let me give you some examples of this. Okay. So um, there are GIS systems or geospatial information systems throughout the world, and these are used primarily by governments and by multilaterals for very good purposes. So, for example, there's a lot of GIS systems in the desert northern part of Africa, and they track the nomadic tribes. And the purpose for this is to provide healthcare in the places where there are nomadic stops and
Hmm.
whatnot. And there are a number of tribes, quite a number of tribes that are tracked. Now, each tribe has an ethnicity. Now, biometrics have been deeply criticized for having algorithms that have racial bias or racial problems. Actually, it's deeper than that. There are some, it depends on the algorithm and the system, but algorithms can have problems with age, either too old, too young, can have problems also with gender, can also have problems with skin tone. The more depth, the more difficulty. Um, but that's just race and gender and age. There's something more, which is ethnicity, actual ethnicity. So there are advances in biometrics, particularly in the region of Africa, where there are some researchers that now have algorithms that have been tailored to detect very specific ethnicities. So some of this is now used to track and use with the GIS systems to track ethnic tribes
Hmm.
as they move across Africa. The purpose is to help those people, but this is an example of a system that can be used to help or hurt.
Yeah.
There, you know, right now it's helping, but can you imagine? There are many thousands of ethnicities across the world, and as systems become more attuned to ethnicity and to other deeper aspects, um, what will be tracked? Will it be health conditions? Will it be who knows what? We don't know. But the capacities are going that direction. So we see a direction.
Hmm.
Do we know what to do about this yet? Well, I do think that tracking ethnicities and tracking health through biometrics or other means needs to have guardrails. So what do those guardrails look like? That I'm not sure of.
Yeah.
And I think we need a lot of work, a lot of factual work to figure that out, as opposed to jumping to a proposed solution that's an all or nothing or based on emotion, not on fact. And in in most of the scientific world, when you make a proposal for a solution, you have to test that solution. But in the legislative world, particularly in privacy, I mean, there are all these proposals for fixing privacy that literally have never undergone a single test. We're past that era now. Any proposal really needs to undergo
Yeah.
a test of truth. And, a lot of the AI work, legislative work that's being done today, people are like, oh, we're so worried it's going to hurt innovation. Anyone who's actually done the science just kind of looks at it and they're like, actually, they apply to like two companies in the entire world. It's almost inapplicable to any AI that's meaningful. So, I
Yeah.
mean, your question was, what's the consumer feeling about this? I think that the ecosystems are so complex. People have this vague sense that there's something that could go wrong, but people also have the vague sense that they want to take advantage of these tools.
Yeah.
But it's very, very hard to see, okay, what are the privacy implications? So we're used to thinking about privacy as our privacy,
Yeah.
your privacy, my privacy. But privacy changes. It really it's almost like it changes color. I mean, I've got animals on my shirt, so goes like from here to here, from one animal to another in many respects. Well, both animals still exist. So, I mean, there's always going to be a form of analog privacy and what I would call, our classical privacy
Yeah.
based on FIPS and those other principles that are very well established and are not going away, by the way. They're still relevant. But now we're also starting to see additional things that can create problems. So I talked about ethnicity tracking through a combination of technologies and modalities. But the other thing I would say is that health is a really important area. So machine learning as applied to health has been giving us a lot of really good advances.
Yeah.
And a lot of those advances are coming in research. So, for example, in the US, there's a program the National Institutes of Health runs called the All of Us program. So, Bob Gelman and I have written two entire, very detailed, geeky reports about this program. It's a genetic database and it's a biobank. And when it was first, put forth, it was not under HIPAA, the Federal Health Privacy Law. And it was not under the common rule, which is a very important human subjects research privacy law. So we wrote this scathing report, and I'm very proud to say that they have voluntarily brought it under the common rule,
Hmm.
and that's a really, really good outcome. But a couple of years ago, it came to their understanding that the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning in a biobank genetic collection like they had was going to create potential problems for groups of people, collective
Yeah.
privacy. So they did a very brave study and they studied tribal members and they did a policy study and a number of other, it was a 2-year study. They did a very good job. It was published in, I believe it was 2023. And it's among the more important studies published in our era. It really is, and it really provides a pathway to start to understand the kind of the way we can find our way forward. So what they found is that if you are a member of an indigenous tribe or a very identifiable group, it could be genetically identifiable.
Hmm.
For example, maybe you have a particular variant of melioidosis or another very, very rare orphan disease. So maybe you have those characteristics. And what they found is that the privacy mechanisms that are available today to us don't cover this. In other words, when you have provided your genetic sample to a large biobank, when it's analyzed with advanced analytics, which
Hmm.
which these are all using today, AI and machine learning, the ability to identify someone as a member of a group is very, very significant. And the thing is that if let's say that you're a member of an indigenous tribe, a Native American tribe, you can be identified as a member of that tribe. And you know, there in the past, in the US past history, there's been stigma associated with that.
Hmm.
So they wrote about this in the report. I'm just repeating what's written in the NIH report. And so they said, look, you need to really think about whether you're going to participate in this program. Some people want to participate so that they increase the healthcare for their community,
Yeah.
their collective group that they're in. Some people want to stay out so that they're not identified to a group. So, for example, I mentioned melanoreistosis. The last time I checked the database, there are 22 people in the United States that have melanoreistosis. It's a very rare disease. Only 1 million people in the world have it. So the basic rule of thumb, it's a basic rule, it's not always true, but a basic rule of thumb is that when you have a data set that's very sparse or very few people are in it, high sparsity data set, you become so identifiable.
Hmm.
So
We
there,
know the names of those 22 people, so to speak.
we know where they live, we know them, we know their when they have kids and the propensity for their kids to have this. And people, there are still places in our lives where there's information we don't want people to have.
Yeah.
People who have significant diagnoses tend to be among those people. So health privacy continues to be a very important area, but it's also a very important area of research.
Yeah.
So you're going to find people across what you call the continuum or the spectrum. Um, there are going to be people who say, take all my data. I have a terrible disease and I want to help other people with it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't care. Then you're going to have people who are like, I'm 35 years old. I have my entire career in front of me. I have kids and it's genetically linked and I want to let my kids have a really good life. I think I'm going to stay out of this. So everyone's going to come to everyone's mileage may vary,
Yeah.
So there's variability here. And I think that we have to be really careful um, to understand all of these permutations and complexities. Privacy, when it comes down to it, is highly contextual. And this is what makes it so, so difficult to actually implement and legislate and whatnot. And when you add AI to that, it gets really complex. And basically, what I would say right now is that we are in a very deep transitional era of great importance. And it's incredibly important that we understand what we're doing and we move slowly and carefully, but we still need to move and understand that AI will require guardrails.
Yeah.
But I'm not certain what all of them look like right now. I know the principles that need to apply, but there are implementation issues and there are all sorts of issues. But there's a couple things I know. I mean, this revolution will be digitalized.
Yeah.
You know, so if you want to ensure that your systems are private, you're going to be using an AI governance tool to do that. So that means AI governance tools had better be properly audited and certified. Right now, they're not.
Hmm.
So we don't have good systems in place. But I think the tools will be really important. And I don't know everything yet, but that's part of the work right now.
Are you excited about where this is going for privacy,
I am.
or
I
or
think
or fearful, or is it kind of the I don't know which one to be yet?
I think neither. I think it just is.
Hmm.
And I think the most important thing is to understand that human beings are enormously resilient, and the systems that we've built in the past have been resilient. However, we have built some deeply flawed systems in the past as well. Everything from political systems to technical systems to other kinds of systems. So we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're building, that we're building things that are beneficial and that have minimal possibility for harm. You know, um, in an ideal world, what it would look like is that we're building these systems and we build them for purposes that are used to benefit
Yeah.
people and the planet. Both. We need both. Um, but benefit people and the planet. But these systems must be resilient enough to not be able to be turned to be used against people.
Yeah.
And we see this exemplified deeply in identity ecosystems today. So, I mean, we all know what happened in Rwanda. In the 1990s, there was a terrible genocide based on their ID cards, which listed ethnicity. That's why
Hmm.
ethnicity is just such a big deal. And the Hutus and the Tutsis, I mean, it literally a massacre, as we all know. And that matter is still kind of bubbling. But the identity ecosystem in Rwanda, I actually I lecture at Carnegie Mellon University in three areas: in privacy, in identity ecosystems in the developing world, and in AI policy in the developing world. And so CMU Africa is in Rwanda. So I had the very great privilege of teaching there in person in 2023. And when I was there to teach identity ecosystems in the developing world, and I invited Josephine Mukesha, who is the national identity authority there, to come and teach part of the class, and she was amazing. She spent an hour and a half talking about what she had specifically done to make sure that their identity system could never be abused in that way again.
Hmm.
Now, no system is perfect,
Yeah.
ever. And it does require good human governance. But we can do a lot to build systems that are robust, that create guardrails so that there is less interference. India's Aadhaar system, it's very massive. It's the largest ID system in the entire world that is biometric and fully digital and real time. There's really nothing else like it. And it covers 1.4 plus billion people, billion with a B. It's incredible. From the largest city to the smallest village that you just wouldn't even believe. But the system, when it was first built, contained profound privacy problems. I mean, we are talking like if you can imagine a nightmare, it was in that
Hmm.
system. You know, if you had you to breathe, you basically needed this ID. And then any vendor you went to, like any grocery store or telecom, they could collect it, collect your biometric, and then build a new database. So all of
Hmm.
this was adjudicated by the Supreme Court of India. And there was a very important landmark decision called the Aadhaar privacy decision. And they struck down, I believe it was Article 57 of the law, which allowed that to happen. And they mandated that India pass data protection legislation. They mandated that they federated their centralized database and provided significant privacy controls. And they did all of this. And today it's a system that I think it's very resilient. It's not perfect. No system is perfect,
Yeah.
again, but it's really decentralized as much as can be for a centralized system. And you're you have tokenized interactions. Your identity is tokenized, so your identity is not flying all over the place. So there are ways of doing this. So there's great hope in the world,
Hmm.
but we just have to figure out if we have the will to do that and what that looks like.
And that's the challenge: is do you have the right people in place, the right people who want to put this in place or not, and the collective will to make it happen.
Well, that's a hard question. And
I don't know if that's as much as a question as a statement.
yeah, you know, it differs by region. I believe Asia is doing really well. I'm very, very impressed with how Asia is handling this transition. I think Europe is doing their very best. Oh my heavens. I attended I went to Georgia, the country of Georgia, to Batumi, the very beautiful city on the Black Sea. And this was for the spring meeting of the European Data Protection Supervisors. And the Georgian Data Protection Authority ran this meeting. They ran probably the best Data Protection Authority meeting I've ever attended. It was so good. And the conversation was all about what we're talking about
Mhm.
today. And there was I believe she's the deputy data protection authority of Italy. She she gave the most articulate speech I have ever heard ever about the role of government and the role of people and the role of data protection authorities and the way that the law intersects with and interacts with technology.
Mhm.
She's very clear, and she said it so much better than I say it, but she basically said in the most eloquent, most fabulous way that, look, these two systems do not yet fit with each other at all. And there are many significant adjustments that will need to be made. We'll need adjustments to the law. We'll need adjustments to the technology, and we'll have to work together to understand this, and we'll have to be very patient.
Mhm.
We can't say lawyers are better. We can't say technologists are better. We can't have this war. We can't say AI is so special that it can't, have a law applied to it. We can't say the law is so special that it doesn't have to recognize the challenges with technology. There has to be a melding, and great adjustment is required. And I
Hmm.
think she really got that right. Um, but the data protection authorities that are in place in like 160 plus countries, not all countries with legislation have DPAs, but the ones that do have them, I have to tell you, the DPAs across the world are doing an amazing job of really trying to understand where we are right now. And they are the people, I believe, who are going to be very, very, very important in leading us forward. And they're not legislators. They are legal experts, technical experts, compliance experts. In other words,
Yeah.
they understand that, just because you have a law in the books doesn't mean that it's actually going to be enforceable or that anyone will care. And they see the legal side, the practical side, and the technical side. And most of these folks now have deep benches of technical, legal, and policy advisors. So that's that. I'm putting a lot of hope on them. I really do. And I'm really glad that this kind of ecosystem of data and privacy experts exist. And there's some really great work at the multilaterals as well. Multilateral work can get very big picture. That's a bit of a flaw with
Yeah.
it. But I think the principles that are emerging are really good. And I'm really impressed with the UNESCO's AI impact assessment work. It's really great. I love what OECD has been doing globally with its global private, the GPay, yeah, global partnership on AI. And I just think that there's a lot of good work happening right now, but some of it really differs by where you live.
Is the US behind the curve or kind of on the cutting edge?
Okay,
I asked that
both,
in tongue in cheek
both.
because I think I know the answer to that
It's
question.
both. It's both. So the United States has, if you look at the what I would call the compute map, the United States has the most compute power in the world. The United States has some of the largest models in the world. It has exceptionally good technologists and real power centers for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I would add quantum to this. The US also has a lot of quantum capacity, and that's compared to the rest of the world. This is quantum becomes very important. We haven't talked
Mhm.
about that, but we need to. But so the US is dominant in that way. However, um, other regions are looking at policy and how this is impacting people in
Mhm.
a different way, and how these new permutations of technology are impacting people and regions and you know in countries. It's quite variable. And so you have a whole bunch of people who are looking at those pieces. You have civil society, you have academia, some governments are doing this work. That report I mentioned that Kate and I did, it's called Risky Analysis. We go through every government that's doing significant AI governance work and talk about the tools they're developing. And we're in a moving state. So the US, if you ask me how it's doing, it's ahead on compute. It's behind on, understanding how to put guardrails up.
Mhm.
I think there's great reluctance in the US to slow innovation.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Here's the balancing test. The studies that are looking at trust in digital ecosystems show that the developing wealthy world has the least amount of trust in the ecosystems that are being built there, which means that those systems aren't going to be adopted
Yeah.
as quickly. So there's a great balancing. So um, you know, if a legislation is too tight, you will have a problem. If the legislation is too loose, you're going to have a trust problem,
Yeah.
and that's going to reduce adoption. So you end up in two different holes, deficits, for two different reasons.
Yeah.
So you want to find that sweet spot, and the sweet spot is moving forward really slowly, understanding that we will need guardrails, but they're going to need to be probably very specific to use case, maybe even to, in the US, I'm speaking only,
Hmm.
maybe from the states, from a state level. But, let me give you a great example here. So the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA in the US, they have they have a medical device program. So there's well over 1,000 medical devices. Each medical device in the United States has a has what's called an A119 standard attached to it. A119 is a very unknown US law that provides for creating a voluntary consensus standard
Hmm.
for something very narrow and precise. It's basically here's a heart pump, and let's make an auditable standard for this heart pump. And let's do it, let's talk about this, let's get this done, and let's get this heart pump out and make sure we have oversight over it. That's the goal.
Hmm.
And the whole idea of the voluntary consensus standards is that they're faster than regular standards like ISO, standards that can take years to make. Medical research wants to move faster than that. And this was a byproduct of 25 years ago, trying to do some modernization at the FDA. So now what's happening is that as the FDA is using AI in medical devices, what's happening is that you're seeing the publication of A119 VCS standards in medical devices that are including AI, and they're fascinating. So one recent device, and again, it's a heart pump because it's just easy to compare.
Hmm.
So there was a heart pump, and then the FDA published like a before and after of what happened to the AI in this heart pump. So a heart pump that is using AI to help modulate it. When you first literally are using it in a person, it's going to behave beautifully. And you see this nice clean graph, with very little noise or fluctuation in how it's operating. It's just beautiful, nice lines,
Hmm.
clear, clean. It looks like a ballpoint marker or felt tip marker is drawn like a red or a blue line, right? But as time goes on, the fit or how well the algorithm functions with the data can go off. In fact, it can and it will. It needs to be adjusted. It's just like a car needs to be tuned or get oil every
Yeah.
once in a while. Algorithms need to be adjusted and refit. So there's a monitor on these particular heart pumps that give a warning when there's too much noise in the system. Noise is like having dirt in your oil.
Yeah.
So if there's too much noise in the algorithm, you can look at the algorithm output. It's like all these lines, all of a sudden, instead of one line, you've got like 50 lines and they're intersecting and very messy. You do not want this going on. So they use an AI governance tool to do noise reduction and bring the noise back down to a good
Hmm.
level. So you need a good auditing standard to say, what's a good level for this noise? You need that standard. That's not a global standard. That's a
Yeah.
standard for that machine.
Yeah.
You need a good AI governance tool that will make sure that machine is functioning to its optimum standard. Is that a tool that will be sold to everyone? No. It's a
Hmm.
tool that will be devised for this use case only. But are they completely necessary? Yes. Is there a law that you need? Well, you need the standard. The A119 law is already in place, so you don't need a new law for this. So in this case at the FDA, they are functioning really well within what they're doing, and each medical device gets a standard. So I think that's a good example of uh, something that's happening right now. And what we need to do is ask the questions. Are we looking at a different world where we don't have these big, giant silver bullet laws? Maybe we have more flexible, like, voluntary consensus standards, but we have really strong auditing
Hmm.
requirements, really strong oversight requirements. Maybe there are differences in how we do this, and maybe it's use cases, maybe it's ecosystems. I just don't know yet. This is now we're in the realm where I just don't know. And I think that it would be impossible for anyone to really know everything right now.
Yeah.
But I think we can see hints of where this is going, and we can, I think in 3 to 5 years, I think we'll have a much clearer idea. But it is so important that we don't jump to conclusions on any side of the argument or any area of the argument.
Hmm.
We need to gather facts, gather the research, gather the evidence, and let the use cases talk to us empirically. Let let the facts speak. And try to stay away from let's regulate AI. Let's don't regulate AI. I mean, these are emotional arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on specific situations that happened.
Yes, and
Yeah.
there's a billion situations that are happening. That's what we're dealing with. The complexity of what we're talking about right now is so great that it's really difficult for the human mind to fully understand it. It's like we talked about nonlinear change.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk about nonlinear to students, I like to bring up a graph, and it shows linear thinking, which has this beautiful like ski slope like this. But then nonlinear is like all of a sudden you're on a high jump. It's like this. It just and it's so hard. It's like compounding interest times a billion. That's where we are with privacy. So yeah, so one of the things I'm doing this summer is I'm doing a lot of writing on modern privacy and what it means. So all that's coming out in September, early September, late August, all in chunks and pieces. But yeah, it it's complicated. How's
Yeah.
that? But it doesn't mean there's not a through line. I
Yeah.
think we'll find that.
Yeah. So if people want to read about your musings, I don't know if musings is your thoughts on where we're going, where can they find that or the what you're producing?
Yeah, so I tend to produce very long works. However, I'm trying to get a lot better at that. So you can find that on, we have podcasts, and I'm actually in the process of making a very short series, like short, in other words, I talk only for 15 minutes. And just like a lot of like podcasts on these musings. So those are coming out in the fall. I also have a lot of op-eds coming out about all of this stuff. I tend to write 100-page reports that take years. That's where most of my stuff is, but I think the world has changed, so I'm trying to also change with it and write more musings. But you can find literally thousands of articles and things I've written on worldprivacyforum.org, and we just redid our website, so it's a little bit hard to find things right now, but we're still building it out.
Awesome. Pam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for your invitation.
You-
It's been great thinking out loud with you.
Yes. Thank you.